Glad you're here with me today. Stay with me until the end and drop a comment letting me know what city you're watching from. The moment I walked through those courthouse doors, my nephew looked up from his phone, smirked at his wife, and shook his head like I was some kind of joke, like I'd wandered into the wrong building by accident. He'd always had that look, like he was doing me a favor just by being in the same room. But then the attorney on the other side of the table opened his briefcase, pulled out a single document, and slid it across to the mediator. And everything stopped. The mediator, a serious woman in her 50s who hadn't so much as blinked during the entire preceding hour, looked down at the paper. Then she looked up at me. Her pen froze in midair. She started, then caught herself. She cleared her throat and straightened in her chair, but her hands were no longer steady. My nephew frowned. His wife grabbed his arm. Nobody in that room understood what had just shifted, except me. I had known this moment was coming for exactly 11 days. I had been waiting for it quietly, the way you wait for a storm you saw forming on the horizon while everyone else was still looking at their phones. They thought I was just a 71-year-old woman who needed to be managed. They had no idea who they were sitting across from. My mornings in Cloverfield had a rhythm to them that I'd held on to for almost 40 years. Up at 6:30, kettle on, windows open just a crack to let in whatever the day was offering. Birdsong in summer, cold silence in winter. My late husband Bernard had built our kitchen table himself, sanded it smooth over one long weekend, stained it the color of honey. Every morning I pressed both palms flat against that table while my coffee brewed, just to feel the wood grain under my fingers. It kept me grounded, kept me connected to him. Bernard passed 3 years ago, quietly, the way he'd done most things in his life. He was a man of few words and careful habits, a retired civil engineer who had spent decades planning drainage systems and overpasses, who read trade journals in bed and kept a yellow legal pad on his nightstand for notes. I used to tease him that he planned everything except what to say at dinner. He'd just smile. He was the kind of man whose love showed up in actions so small you almost missed them. A thermos of coffee left on the counter before you woke. A grocery list already written out in his precise handwriting. A car filled with gas so you'd never have to worry about it. I missed him every single morning. I still do. Our son Kevin lived out in Portland with his family. 3 grandchildren I saw at Thanksgiving if the flights cooperated. He called on Sundays and meant it. He was a good son, steady, the kind of person who doesn't make a lot of noise but is always there when it matters. Then there was my nephew Garrett. Garrett was my late sister Patricia's boy. Patricia passed 8 years ago from ovarian cancer, and after she was gone, Bernard and I had quietly folded Garrett into our lives the way you fold in family when there's no one else left to do it. We'd helped him through a rough patch after his divorce, let him stay in the spare room for 4 months, co-signed on his first decent car. He'd been grateful back then. Warm, even. He called Bernard Uncle B and used to help him in the yard on weekends without being asked. But Garrett had married Stacy 3 years ago, and something had changed. Or maybe nothing had changed, and I was only now seeing clearly what had always been there underneath. Stacy had an eye for things. For what things cost, for what things were worth, for what she felt she was owed by proximity to other people's effort. She'd walked through my house the first time Bernard brought them for dinner and commented on the crown molding, the hardwood floors, the original casement windows. Not warmly, more like she was taking inventory. After Bernard died, the calls from Garrett picked up. At first I thought it was grief, his way of staying connected to his uncle through me. Then the visits started. Then the comments. Aunt Nora, honestly, a house this size is a lot for one person. Have you thought about one of those 55-plus communities? They're really lovely now. Pools, activities. You'd have people around you. It must be so hard to keep up with the yard, the maintenance. Garrett and I could help you think through your options. My name is Nora Caldwell, and this is my home. Bernard and I paid off the mortgage together in 2009. Through a small dinner to celebrate with a bottle of wine, we've been saving for something worth celebrating. Every room in this house has a memory woven into its walls. The back porch, where Kevin took his first steps. The hallway wallpaper I chose myself in 1989 and never once regretted. The kitchen table Bernard built. I told Garrett twice, gently, that I was fine, that I wasn't going anywhere. He nodded both times and changed the subject, and I thought the matter was settled. I was wrong. It was a Tuesday in September when they arrived unannounced. I was in the garden pulling late-season tomatoes off the vine, wearing Bernard's old flannel shirt over my clothes because the morning was cool. I heard the car pull up, heard the doors, and then Garrett was coming around the side gate with a man I didn't recognize. Tall, dark portfolio bag under his arm, wearing the kind of shoes that tell you everything you need to know about a person's priorities. Aunt Nora, sorry to just stop by. This is Dale Marsh. He's a real estate consultant. I took my gardening gloves off one finger at a time and looked at the man named Dale Marsh. He was already glancing at the roofline, the gutters, the siding. I didn't invite a real estate consultant, I said. Garrett smiled, the way he'd been smiling at me for months. Patient, slightly pained, the way you smile at someone who's being difficult without understanding why. We just want to get a sense of the market value. No pressure. It's good information to have. Dale Marsh was already stepping toward the back corner of the lot, measuring something with his eyes. Nice lot size, he said, mostly to himself. South-facing. Good light. I stood very still and watched my nephew follow this stranger around my property, while neither of them asked me another question. That evening, I called Kevin. He listened without interrupting, which was his way. What do you want to do, Mom? I want to stay in my house. I want Garrett to stop treating it like a transaction. Then we make sure that's what happens. Kevin was quiet for a moment. Do you want me to come out? Not yet, I said. Let me see what I'm dealing with first. 2 weeks later, Garrett and Stacy arrived with paperwork, an actual folder, a printed document with my name at the top and lines marked with those little adhesive arrow tabs, the ones that say, sign here. Garrett set it on Bernard's table and smoothed it flat with both hands. It's a power of attorney, he said, just a precaution, so that if anything ever happens to you, we can make decisions on your behalf, medical, financial, property-related. It protects you. I picked up the first page and read it carefully. Stacy was watching me from across the table with the expression of someone who has already mentally rearranged the furniture. This gives you control over my assets, I said, in including the house. In an emergency situation, yes. I'm not in an emergency situation. Garrett leaned forward. Aunt Nora, last winter you slipped on the ice on the back step. What if that had been worse? What if you'd... I caught myself on the railing, I said. I have never fallen. But the potential... I closed the folder and pushed it back across the table. I'll have my own attorney review this before I sign anything. Stacy's expression flickered. Garrett's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. That's not necessary, he said. This is standard language. Then my attorney reviewing it will be very quick, I said pleasantly. He didn't like that. They left an hour later without the signed papers, and I sat alone at Bernard's table with my hands folded in my lap, listening to the house settle around me. I wasn't afraid exactly. But I could feel something shifting in the air, the way you feel a change in pressure before weather arrives. I found the accordion folder in the back of Bernard's filing cabinet the following Saturday. I'd been organizing his papers for 3 years in small increments, the way you approach grief, a drawer at a time, a shelf at a time. I'd been through his warranties, his income tax records, his engineering certificates. But the back section of the cabinet was deeper than I'd realized, and inside, behind a hanging file labeled MISC, was an olive green accordion folder with a combination lock threaded through the clasp. Bernard's combination locks always used the same number, the year we met. 1974. My hands were perfectly steady as I opened it. It took me 2 hours to read through everything inside. I sat on the floor of Bernard's study with the papers spread around me, and I read every page twice. By the time I got to the last document, The light in the room had gone golden with late afternoon sun. Bernard had been investing for 31 years without ever once mentioning the scale of it to me. He hadn't hidden it out of secrecy. There were notes, methodical and clear, the same way he labeled everything. He'd started small in the early 90s, index funds and municipal bonds. Then gradually, rental properties. A duplex in neighboring Hartwell. A small commercial strip he'd purchased when a local business folded. A storage facility outside town that he and a former colleague had bought as partners. All of it managed through a property management company, Trident Property Group, whose contact information was paper-clipped to a folder of monthly statements. And then the page that made me sit back against the filing cabinet and close my eyes. Garrett and Stacy's townhouse in the Millbrook development. The one they'd been living in for 2 years. Rented, they told everyone, while they figured out their next step. The management company's name on their lease was Trident Property Group. The owner listed in the records was Bernard James Caldwell. Garrett had been writing rent checks to my husband, and now to me, for 24 months without knowing it. There was a letter at the back of the folder. I recognized Bernard's handwriting before I even unfolded it. Nora, if you're reading this, then you found what I left for you to find. I'm sorry I didn't explain all of this sooner. You always said I planned too far ahead, and you were right. I want you to be safe after I'm gone. Not comfortable, safe. Those are different things. I've watched Garrett over the years, and I've had concerns I didn't know how to voice without causing you pain. He's Patricia's son, and you love him, and I love you for that. But I worried about what he might do if he ever thought there was something of ours he could reach. Everything in this folder belongs to you. It always has. The accounts are in both our names, and upon my death they transfer to you outright. The properties are managed well and the income is steady. You won't have to fight for anything, but you may have to stand your ground. Stand it. All my love, always, Bernard. I sat on that floor for a long time. I cried, and then I stopped, and then I cried again. Not from grief, exactly, or not only from grief. It was the particular ache of being known so completely by someone who was no longer there to be thanked for it. Then I picked up the phone and called Trident Property Group. The woman who answered my call was named Helen Chu. She had been Bernard's contact at Trident for 11 years and had his photograph on her desk. She told me this in the first 5 minutes, in a voice that made it clear she'd been waiting for this call and grieving in her own quiet way. "Mrs. Caldwell," she said, "we have a complete accounting ready for you whenever you want to come in." "Mr. Counts." Caldwell was very specific about how he wanted things to proceed. I came in the next morning in my navy blazer, the one I saved for occasions that required me to be taken seriously, and Helen walked me through everything. Rental income from 6 properties over the past 3 years, sitting in a management account, untouched. A stock portfolio Bernard had carefully balanced over the decades. A stake in the storage facility that had quietly tripled in value. A money market account I hadn't known existed. "Your net assets," Helen said carefully, turning her screen toward me, "are considerably more than most people in your position realize." The number on the screen did not look like my life. My life was coupon clipping and waiting for sales and reusing twist ties. My life was the flannel shirt from the garden and the chipped coffee mug with the handle that needed re-gluing. Bernard had been building this around me for 30 years, and I had never seen the scaffolding. He wanted it to be yours without the burden of managing it while he was alive, Helen said. "He said you'd give too much away if you knew." I almost laughed. He wasn't wrong. And then Helen said, carefully, "Mrs. Caldwell, there's something you should know about your nephew's rental situation." I nodded. "I already found the lease documents." She looked relieved. "He's been making inquiries through a third party trying to establish whether the property management company has any connection to your estate. We think someone advised him to investigate before making his next move." My next move, I thought, was already in motion. Kevin flew in from Portland the following Thursday. He sat at Bernard's table and read through everything without speaking, the way he approached anything serious, fully and without hurry. When he finished, he folded his hands the same way Bernard used to, and I felt something in my chest tighten with how much he looked like his father in that moment. He planned all of this, Kevin said. It wasn't a question. He planned all of this, I confirmed. What do you want to do? I'd had 6 days to think about the answer to that question. I'm not interested in destroying Garrett, I said. He's family, he's Patricia's. But I will not be managed out of my own home, and I will not let him frighten me into signing things that hand him control of what Bernard spent a lifetime building. Kevin nodded. Then we get ahead of it. We met with a family law attorney named Patricia, not my sister, a different Patricia, a brisk and sharp woman who wore reading glasses on a chain and used words like actionable and fiduciary duty with the same ease most people use, and she laid out our options clearly. Garrett had not yet done anything illegal, but the forged direction he was heading, the power of attorney, the unsolicited property appraisal, the pressure, created a clear pattern. If he escalates, she said, we'll be ready. And given what's in these documents, you hold considerably more leverage than he knows. Garrett escalated. The call came on a Sunday evening, 3 weeks after the folder of power of attorney documents had been quietly returned to him unsigned. He was calm in the way people are calm when they're working from a script. Aunt Nora, I've been talking to a geriatric care specialist. I want to be upfront with you. Stacy and I have real concerns about your ability to manage your affairs independently. We've consulted with an attorney about the process for establishing a guardianship. I set my mug down. A guardianship. It's not punitive, it's protective. The specialist can do an evaluation. Garrett. My voice was steady. I'm going to tell you one thing, and I'd like you to hear it clearly. I am not confused. I am not frail. And I am entirely aware of my financial situation. Far more aware than you might expect. I paused. Before you take another step in this direction, I'd strongly suggest you look carefully at the name on your landlord's account. Silence. Long silence. What does that mean? He said finally. His voice had changed. It means exactly what it sounds like, I said. Good night, Garrett. He called back 4 times that night. I didn't answer. I sat in Bernard's chair with the accordion folder in my lap and the reading lamp on and felt, for the first time in months, entirely calm. They came to the house 2 days later. Garrett and Stacy and a man I didn't recognize, introduced as their attorney. A young man who was trying very hard to appear more seasoned than he was. I let them in. I offered coffee. Nobody took any. Their attorney spread papers on Bernard's table. Preliminary documentation, he said, for a competency evaluation and voluntary property transfer. Kevin was seated in the corner of the room. He hadn't announced himself. Garrett hadn't noticed him when they came in, and when he looked up and registered his cousin's presence, something in his face went uncertain. Our attorney arrived 12 minutes later. She didn't offer pleasantries. She set her own file on the table, opened it, and turned to their young attorney with the reading glasses on her chain, the look that said she had eaten people like him for breakfast and found them under season. Your client, she said, has been residing for the past 26 months in a property owned by Nora Caldwell. The rental payments your client believed were going to an independent management company have been depositing directly into a holding account in Mrs. Caldwell's name. We have documentation. She paused. We also have documentation of the appraisal your client commissioned without Mrs. Caldwell's knowledge or consent. The power of attorney document your client presented to Mrs. Zavel Caldwell without independent legal counsel present, and your client's recorded phone call to Mrs. Caldwell regarding guardianship proceedings. We have, in short, a complete picture. The room was quiet. Their attorney leaned toward Garrett, whispered. Garrett stared at the table. Here is what Mrs. Caldwell is prepared to offer, our attorney continued. Your client may continue residing in the Millbrook property at the current rate for 60 additional days, at which point the lease will not be renewed. Mrs. Caldwell requires no further contact from your client regarding her property, her finances, or her personal affairs. In exchange, Mrs. Caldwell will not pursue the legal remedies available to her at this time. She let that land. If your client chooses to contest this arrangement, Mrs. Caldwell will pursue those remedies in full. I think we both understand what that would mean for your client. Stacy was the first to speak. You own our house, she said. Not to our attorney, to me. Her voice was strange, hollow, and sharp at once. Bernard owned it, I said, and now I do. Garrett looked up at me then. He looked young in that moment, and lost, and more like Patricia than I'd seen in years. It didn't stop hurting, but it didn't change anything either. We'll need time to find another place, he said. His voice was flat. 60 days is adequate, our attorney said. I'll have the written agreement drawn up by tomorrow. The day of the mediation session had been my idea. It was the final step, a formal meeting to settle the outstanding questions about a piece of property Garrett had claimed Bernard had promised him verbally, a small parcel of land adjacent to the storage facility. He had no documentation. We had 30 years of Bernard's meticulous records showing he'd never made that promise to anyone. I hadn't wanted to go alone. Kevin drove me, waited in the lobby. I wore the navy blazer again. I carried the accordion folder. I wasn't afraid. When Garrett saw me come in, there was no smirk. He looked tired. His attorney looked even younger than I remembered. It was 20 minutes into the session, when our attorney was presenting the third set of Bernard's dated records, that the mediator picked up the final document and paused. She looked at the date, then at my name, then back at the document. Her pen stopped. She looked up at me. Mrs. Caldwell, she said slowly, this survey record, you were the one who filed it. In 2003, I said. Bernard and I filed it together. We have the county confirmation. She set the paper down carefully. I knew your husband, she said. She said it quietly, like she was saying something she hadn't planned to say. Bernard Caldwell. I was the junior assessor on the Hartwell Municipal Project in 2001. He was the consulting engineer. He was the most methodical man I'd ever met. She caught herself, straightened. I'm sorry, this doesn't affect the proceeding. But it had affected the room. Garrett was looking at me differently. His attorney had gone still. The mediator cleared her throat and continued, but her voice had shifted, softened at the edges, and when she ruled, in full, unambiguous terms, that the parcel of land was entirely and completely mine, she said it with a certainty that felt like more than a legal judgment. Outside, Kevin was waiting. How'd it go? He asked. It's done, I said. It's all done. Garrett and Stacy moved out of the Millbrook townhouse 41 days later. I know because Helen Chu confirmed the unit was vacant and ready for new tenants. I didn't drive by. I didn't need to. Kevin stayed for 2 weeks, longer than I'd asked him to. We cleared the last of Bernard's filing cabinet together, organized the documents, met again with the attorney to put everything in proper order. A trust, clearly written, that left nothing to ambiguity. Kevin as executor, with full transparent accounting. Everything where it was supposed to be. The night before Kevin flew back to Portland, we sat on the back porch with the lights off and the sky very clear. He'd brought out 2 glasses of the good Scotch Bernard, kept on the top shelf, the one he opened only for things worth marking. He really did plan everything, Kevin said. He really did. I turned my glass in my hands. I used to think it was just his engineer's brain. Everything accounted for, everything in its place. But it was more than that. He was protecting you. He was protecting us. I looked up at the sky. He just didn't say so out loud. Kevin reached over and put his hand over mine for a moment, the way Bernard used to, and we sat there quietly until the night got too cool to stay outside. I did think about what to do with Garrett. I thought about it for a long time, through the autumn and into the winter. I'm not someone who carries anger well. It's heavy, and I've never had the shoulders for it. But I also knew that forgiveness, real forgiveness, isn't something you can hand someone like a document. It has to be built, slowly, from both sides. He called in December. Once, brief, uncertain. I know I don't have any right to ask, he said. I wanted to say that I understand now what I was doing, what I was becoming. A pause. I don't think I liked that person very much. I listened to him. I didn't say it was fine because it wasn't fine. I didn't say it didn't matter because it did. I said, Garrett, your mother would have been ashamed of what you tried to do. She would also have told you that people can change if they want to badly enough. That part is up to you. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, I know. Then let that be the start of something, I said. And I meant it. That spring, I did something I'd been thinking about since the day I sat on Bernard's study floor with all those papers spread around me. I contacted a local nonprofit called Safe Harbor, an organization that provided transitional housing and legal assistance to women over 60 who'd been displaced from their homes through family pressure, fraud, or abuse. I'd found them through a Google search in a moment of 3 a.m. clarity, and the more I read about their work, the more I recognized my own story in the stories of the women they served. I made a donation, a significant one. Then I called their executive director, a woman named Frances who had the kind of voice that sounds like it has seen everything and is still standing, and I asked how else I could help. We need an advocate, Frances said. Someone who can sit with women when they first come to us, when they're scared and embarrassed and convinced no one will believe them. Someone who's been through it. I've been through it, I said. I started volunteering the following month. I went in on Wednesday mornings, sat in the small conference room with the window that looked out on a parking lot, and I listened. I listened to a 67-year-old former teacher whose son had convinced her to sign her house into an LLC, and then dissolved the LLC. I listened to a 73-year-old retired nurse whose stepchildren had filed for guardianship the week after her husband died. I listened to a 64-year-old woman who had driven to the shelter with everything she owned in 3 grocery bags because there had been nowhere else to go. I couldn't fix everything. I didn't pretend to. But I could sit with someone in the early part, the part where you're still not sure you have the right to be angry, where you're still apologizing for taking up space. I had been in that part. I knew what it felt like, and I knew what it helped to hear. Bernard would have approved. He was always better at showing love through action than through words, and I think I learned it from watching him all those years. You build what you want to exist in the world. You put your hands on it and you work. The kitchen table is still in the same spot it's always been. I still press my palms flat against it every morning while my coffee brews. I still tend to the garden Bernard designed, the raised beds, the stone path, the corner where the light is right for tomatoes. I still wear his old flannel shirt when the mornings are cool enough. But I'm not the same woman who sat across from Garrett and Stacy and thought maybe, just maybe, they had a point. Maybe she was too old, too alone, too much trouble. I know better now. I know that the quietest people in a room are sometimes the ones who have built something extraordinary without making any noise about it. I know that dignity doesn't have an expiration date, and I know that the most important thing Bernard left me wasn't money or property or a carefully organized accordion folder. It was the knowledge that I was worth protecting. It's worth protecting yourself, too. If you're watching this and you recognize any piece of what I've described, the pressure, the paperwork, the patient erosion of your right to your own choices, please know you are not being unreasonable. You are not being difficult. You are being you, and that is worth standing up for. If my story reached you today, leave me a comment. Tell me your city. Tell me what stayed with you. Tell me your own story if you want to share it. I read every single one. And I'll be back next week with another story that I think you'll want to hear. The table is still here. The coffee is still on, and I'm not going anywhere. I've thought a lot about what made Garrett believe he could do what he did. And I don't think it was cruelty, not exactly. I think it was the quiet assumption that I was finished, that because I was older, because I was alone, because I wore my husband's old flannel shirt in the garden and reused grocery bags and didn't talk much about money, I must not have much left to offer, that I would be easier to move around than to reckon with. That assumption is something I've seen in other places since then. In the faces of the women I sit with on Wednesday mornings at Safe Harbor, the retired teacher, the former nurse, the woman who arrived with 3 grocery bags, every one of them had been treated, at some point, like a problem to be solved rather than a person to be heard. And every one of them had started to wonder, in their quietest moments, whether maybe those people were right. Here is what I know now that I didn't know clearly enough before any of this happened. The way people treat you is almost never about your actual worth. It is almost always about what they believe they can get away with. Garrett didn't try to take my home because I was weak. He tried because he thought I wouldn't fight back. Those are entirely different things, and the difference matters. What stopped him wasn't luck. It wasn't Bernard's money, though that certainly helped. It was the fact that Bernard had spent 30 years making careful decisions, and I had spent 30 years paying attention to the kind of man he was, and when the moment came, I trusted what I knew. I opened the filing cabinet. I read the documents. I called Helen. I didn't apologize for needing to understand what I owned. Tracing back through all of it, every step had a consequence, and every consequence led somewhere. Garrett's choices led to his own exposure. Bernard's quiet diligence led to my protection. My decision to stand my ground instead of sign the papers led to the morning in that mediation room when the whole table went still. That's not fate. That's not luck. That is the ordinary, unglamorous work of living with integrity over time, and it compounds the way interest compounds, slowly, invisibly, until one day you open a folder and realize what's been building all along. I also think about what Bernard wrote. Use what I've left you not to punish, but to protect. He knew me well enough to know I'd need that instruction. Because my first instinct, sitting on that floor with those papers, wasn't power. It was grief. It was the ache of having been loved so carefully by someone who was no longer there. The anger came later, and I let it. But I never let it be the thing that drove me. I wanted safety, not revenge. I wanted my home, not his ruin. The women at Safe Harbor have taught me that this distinction between protecting yourself and destroying someone else is one of the hardest things to hold on to when you've been genuinely wronged. It takes a kind of discipline that nobody talks about, not strength in the loud sense, strength in the staying with yourself sense, knowing what you actually want and refusing to be pulled off it by fury or fear. I am 71 years old. I press my palms flat on Bernard's table every morning. I still wear his flannel shirt when the air is cool, and I am more certain than I have ever been that the life I built, quietly, together with a man who loved me through action more than words, was worth every bit of the standing I did to keep it. You are allowed to stand too, whatever room you're in, whatever paper someone is sliding across the table toward you, you are allowed to take your time, to say not yet, to call someone you trust, to read it twice. You are allowed to know what you own, in every sense of that word. Don't let anyone rush you out of that.